Yes, you are under arrest for the murder of Frank.
No! I didn't kill my husband! Oh, God, please. I didn't kill my husband, I swear.
I would think so. People get poisoned by it all the time. It doesn't take much. If there was a tape recorder on, I'd be screwed if I keep answering these questions.
This story isn't just disturbing, it will haunt you long after it ends. A husband, seemingly healthy and full of life, suddenly falls gravely ill. His wife, Angelina Rodriguez, is right by his side, the picture of a devoted spouse, worried, heartbroken, desperate for answers. But something feels off. Doctors search for an explanation, but his condition only worsens, and then, in a tragic twist, he's gone. Montebello, California, wasn't a place known for crime. It was a quiet, suburban town where families built their lives, where the most pressing concerns were morning traffic or weekend plans. It wasn't the kind of place where you'd expect to find a murder hidden in plain sight. But behind the closed doors of one home, a sinister plan had been unfolding for months, disguised as misfortune. Frank Rodriguez's death was unexpected, yet no one questioned it. At first, there were no signs of violence, no immediate cause for suspicion. The people closest to him accepted the tragedy for what it seemed to be, a devastating, unforeseen loss. And his wife? She played the role of the grieving widow with heartbreaking precision. Tearful, shaken, she spoke of their life together, of the future they had planned, now cruelly stolen away. But then, something strange happened. In the midst of her grief, Angelina let something slip, something small, almost insignificant, but for those paying attention, it was more than a mistake. It was the first crack in the carefully crafted image she had built. It was the kind of detail that no one, not even a devastated wife, should have known. It was just enough to plant a seed of doubt, enough to make someone ask, could this really have been an accident? And once that question was asked, there was no turning back. The more investigators looked, the more unsettling the picture became. Frank's death wasn't the first tragedy in Angelina's life, and soon, what had seemed like a series of unfortunate events began to take on a more chilling shape. Had Frank been the victim of a slow, deliberate crime? And if so, why? What was hidden beneath the surface of their marriage, buried under layers of deception? The answers were darker than anyone could have imagined. This is the horrifying case of Angelina Rodriguez. Angelina Rodriguez and Frank Rodriguez's love story began in the most unassuming of settings, a place where troubled youth sought guidance and discipline. Both were employed at Angel Gate Academy, a military-style boot camp nestled in San Luis Obispo, California. Frank, a dedicated special education teacher, was known for his unwavering commitment to his students and his gentle demeanor. His colleagues admired his patience and the genuine care he extended to those around him. Angelina, on the other hand, was a woman whose past was marred by failed relationships and personal challenges. Yet, she presented herself as charming, intelligent, and assertive, a woman who seemed to know precisely what she wanted from life. Their paths crossed amidst the structured routines of the academy, and an undeniable connection sparked between them. Despite the brevity of their acquaintance, their relationship progressed rapidly. In April 2000, merely 2 months after their initial meeting, they exchanged vows. To outsiders, it appeared as a whirlwind romance, a testament to love's unpredictable and impassioned nature. Friends and family observed their swift union with a mix of admiration and caution, noting the intensity with which they embraced their new life together. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic partnership lay complexities that few could have anticipated. Angelina's history was not just a series of unfortunate relationships, it was a tapestry woven with patterns of manipulation and concealed motives. Unbeknownst to Frank, he was her 4th husband, a detail she had artfully obscured. Her previous marriages had ended under dubious circumstances, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and unresolved suspicions. Shortly after their nuptials, Angelina broached the topic of financial security. She persuaded Frank of the necessity of securing their future through life insurance policies. Trusting his new bride implicitly, Frank acquiesced. A substantial policy was established, valuing his life at $250,000, with Angelina designated as the sole beneficiary. At the time, this seemed a prudent decision, a responsible step for a couple embarking on a shared journey. Yet, in retrospect, this agreement would later be scrutinized as a pivotal move in a calculated scheme. As the days turned into weeks, subtle changes began to emerge in their domestic life. Angelina's demeanor shifted in almost imperceptible ways. She exhibited an unusual interest in the specifics of the insurance policy, frequently discussing hypothetical scenarios that left Frank mildly unsettled. She also began isolating him from his close friends and family under the guise of wanting to spend more quality time together. This gradual seclusion ensured that fewer eyes were observing the dynamics of their relationship. Frank, ever the optimist, dismissed these red flags as mere quirks of a new marriage. He remained unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, an intricate web of deceit and ulterior motives. Angelina's actions were not those of a loving wife, but of a predator, meticulously setting the stage for an unthinkable act. The facade of their blissful union persisted, with Angelina skillfully maintaining appearances. She engaged in community events, portraying the role of the devoted wife, all the while concealing her true intentions. Her charm and intelligence masked the darkness lurking within, allowing her to manipulate those around her with ease. Frank had no idea that the vows he exchanged with Angelina would set him on a path toward an unimaginable fate. He saw love, commitment, and a future together, but Angelina saw something else entirely. The wheels were already in motion, and soon what seemed like a loving marriage would take a dark and deadly turn. It started gradually, almost imperceptibly. At first it was just exhaustion. Long days at work left Frank feeling more drained than usual. He blamed it on stress, maybe even a mild bug. But the fatigue didn't go away. It clung to him, weighing him down like a thick fog. Then came the nausea. One morning he barely made it to the bathroom in time, his stomach twisting violently as he emptied its contents into the toilet. The sharp pains in his abdomen followed soon after, stabbing at his insides without warning. Angelina was right there, holding his hand, her voice soft with concern. "Maybe it's something you ate," she suggested, stroking his back as he leaned over the sink, splashing cold water on his face. Frank nodded weakly. That had to be it. Maybe some bad takeout, or maybe his body was just adjusting to the new routine of married life. He didn't dwell on it, but the days stretched into weeks, and the symptoms didn't disappear. If anything, they grew worse. The fatigue deepened, leaving him struggling to stay awake at work. His appetite waned, and when he did eat, he often felt sick afterward. His limbs ached, as if he had the flu, yet there was no fever, no congestion, just a strange, creeping sense that something wasn't right. Angelina, ever the doting wife, made him tea in the evenings, claiming it would help settle his stomach. It was warm, herbal, soothing. He drank it without question, grateful for the comfort. But instead of getting better, he only felt worse. What Frank didn't know, what no one knew, was that Angelina had laced the tea with crushed oleander leaves, a highly toxic plant that could stop a heart if administered in the right dose. But the dose hadn't been quite right. Instead of killing him, it had only made him sick. The failure frustrated her, but she didn't let it show. She simply adjusted her approach, waiting for the right moment to try again. Then, one night, a new danger crept into their home. Frank had been lying on the couch when he noticed it, the unmistakable scent of gas. His brow furrowed as he sat up, sniffing the air. The odor was strong, pungent, unnatural. His first thought was the stove, but when he checked the kitchen, the burners were off. The smell was even stronger near the laundry room. His stomach twisted, not from illness this time, but from unease. He knelt down beside the dryer and inspected the gas line. The valve had been loosened. His heart pounded as he quickly tightened it, then opened the windows to air out the house. It had to be an accident. Maybe the maintenance crew had done something the last time they checked the unit. Or maybe he had somehow knocked it loose himself. He mentioned it to Angelina, expecting her to share his concern. Instead, she waved it off with a smile. "That's so strange," she said, shaking her head. "Good thing you caught it. Maybe the landlord should take a look at it." Her reaction was so casual, so nonchalant, that Frank felt silly for worrying, but in hindsight, that moment should have sent alarms blaring in his mind. Because it wasn't an accident. Angelina had loosened the valve herself, hoping the house would fill with enough gas to cause an explosion, or at the very least, render Frank unconscious while he slept. The plan had failed, but she didn't panic. She simply moved on to the next idea. Frank, meanwhile, brushed off the incident and continued pushing through his strange illness. His weight had started to drop, his once healthy frame thinning out. Co-workers noticed he wasn't himself. His usual energy was gone, replaced by a sluggishness that even he couldn't explain. But through it all, Angelina remained by his side, attentive and affectionate. She made him meals, poured his tea, and assured him he would feel better soon. She had the perfect role, the devoted wife, standing by her husband's side through sickness and health. But in reality, she was running out of patience. The failed attempts had only strengthened her resolve. If the tea hadn't worked and the gas leak hadn't worked, she needed something stronger, something that would leave no room for error. That's when she turned to antifreeze. Angelina had tried and failed before. The oleander tea had made Frank sick, but hadn't killed him. The gas leak could have ended in disaster, but he had caught it in time. Each attempt had brought her closer to what she wanted, but none had finished the job. Now, she needed something foolproof, something that wouldn't be detected right away. Antifreeze was perfect. Ethylene glycol, its active ingredient, is odorless and sweet, making it easy to disguise in food or drinks. More importantly, its symptoms mimic those of natural illness: nausea, vomiting, dizziness, and eventually organ failure. If administered slowly over time, the victim's health deteriorates in a way that doesn't immediately raise red flags. By the time they realize something is wrong, it's already too late. Angelina wasted no time. She started adding small amounts of antifreeze to Frank's drinks, his tea, his juice, anything she could mix it into without arousing suspicion. At first, the effects weren't obvious. Frank was already feeling unwell from weeks of unexplained sickness, so the added symptoms blended seamlessly into what he believed was just a prolonged illness. But then, his condition took a sharp turn for the worse. His nausea became unbearable. His stomach felt like it was twisting in knots, cramping so violently that he could barely eat. His muscles ached constantly, his limbs growing weak. Then came the confusion, moments where his thoughts felt sluggish, where he struggled to remember simple things or form coherent sentences. He was dying, but he didn't know it. By early September 2000, Frank could barely get out of bed. The pain was excruciating, a deep, consuming agony that left him gasping for air. Angelina remained at his side, feeding him sips of water, wiping the sweat from his forehead, playing the part of the devoted wife as she watched her plan unfold. On the night of September 9, 2000, Frank's body finally gave in. He collapsed, convulsing, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. His kidneys were shutting down, his body drowning in the very poison that had been killing him slowly for weeks. Angelina called 911, her voice frantic, but there was no panic in her heart. This was the final act. By the time paramedics arrived, Frank was already gone. He was just 41 years old, a seemingly healthy, hard-working man, suddenly dead without warning. His death was shocking, but at first, it didn't seem suspicious. There were no signs of foul play, no wounds, no struggle. The initial assumption was that he had died of natural causes, perhaps a sudden, undiagnosed illness, a stroke, maybe, a heart attack. It was tragic, but not unheard of. Angelina played her role flawlessly. She wept in front of friends and family, accepted condolences with trembling hands, and spoke of Frank's sudden decline with a grief-stricken voice. But behind closed doors, she wasted no time. She immediately pushed for the life insurance payout. She needed the money, and she needed it fast. But in her rush to collect, she made a crucial mistake. she demanded an expedited, and that raised suspicions. At first, Frank's death had seemed like an unfortunate tragedy, a sudden and unexplained illness that took his life too soon. But when Angelina pushed for a quick payout, insurance agents hesitated. They had seen cases like this before, grieving spouses eager to claim benefits, but something about her urgency felt off. It was too soon, too forceful. When asked for Frank's medical history, Angelina provided vague responses. She claimed he had been feeling sick for weeks, but she couldn't provide any medical records to back it up. No doctor visits, no prescriptions, no prior health conditions. A healthy 41-year-old man had simply wasted away in a matter of days, and yet she insisted there was nothing unusual about it. That was enough to raise a red flag. Insurance companies don't hand out large sums of money without verification, especially not $250,000. The policy was relatively new, taken out just months before Frank's death. Another red flag. The insurer launched an internal review, and as part of standard protocol, they reached out to the coroner's office. That was when everything changed. Frank's body had not yet been buried, and a closer examination was ordered. The coroner performed a full autopsy, searching for anything that could explain his rapid decline. When the toxicology results came back, the answer was undeniable. Frank had been poisoned. Ethylene glycol, the key ingredient in antifreeze. It wasn't just a trace amount. His body was riddled with it, a slow but steady build-up over time. This wasn't accidental exposure. This was intentional. And just like that, a routine insurance claim had become a homicide investigation. Detectives were called in, and their first priority was to look at the person who had the most to gain from Frank's death. All eyes turned to Angelina. At first they approached her carefully, treating her as a grieving widow. They asked about Frank's health, his final days, his symptoms. Angelina played the part well, feigning sorrow, claiming she had done everything she could to care for him. She didn't seem surprised by the suggestion that something was wrong. Instead, she latched onto the idea, even suggesting that perhaps Frank had been exposed to something at work. Maybe it was something he ate. Maybe it was just bad luck. But detectives weren't convinced. They started looking into her background, hoping to build a clearer picture of her life before Frank. They expected to find the usual things: a difficult marriage, financial struggles, maybe even another man. But what they uncovered was far more chilling. Frank wasn't the first person to die under suspicious circumstances in Angelina's life. And as investigators dug deeper, they realized that Frank's death wasn't just the tragic ending to a marriage. It was part of a pattern. At first, detectives believed they were dealing with a case of financial desperation. Angelina had taken out a life insurance policy, Frank had died in suspicious circumstances, and she had rushed to claim the money. It had all the hallmarks of a calculated murder for profit. But then, a disturbing revelation changed everything. Angelina had done this before. It started with a single note in her background check, an old lawsuit filed nearly a decade earlier. In 1993, Angelina had sued a pacifier manufacturing company after the tragic death of her 13-month-old daughter, Alicia. According to the official report at the time, Alicia had choked on a defective pacifier while in her mother's care. Angelina had been devastated, a grieving mother fighting for justice. Her lawsuit resulted in a $700,000 settlement. But now, investigators were seeing the case in an entirely different light. Frank had been poisoned over time, his death masked as illness. What if Alicia's death had also been staged? Forensic experts were called in to re-examine the old evidence. They analyzed the photos, medical records, and police reports from the night Alicia died. One detail stood out immediately: the pacifier. The rubber nipple had been torn, supposedly causing Alicia to choke. But when forensic analysts studied the pattern of the tear, they found something deeply unsettling. The damage wasn't consistent with wear and tear or a factory defect. It looked deliberate, as if someone had forcibly pulled it apart to create the illusion of an accident. Detectives sat with that information, horrified. Had Angelina murdered her own baby for money? The evidence wasn't conclusive enough to reopen the case officially, but it painted a chilling picture. Angelina had already benefited financially from one tragic death, and now, years later, she had done the same thing to Frank. This realization put detectives on high alert. They needed to move quickly before Angelina had the chance to harm anyone else. They scrutinized her past, looking for any other unexplained incidents, and they found more red flags. Stories from former friends, ex-husbands, and co-workers who described Angelina as manipulative, calculating, and always focused on money. One former acquaintance recalled how Angelina often bragged about being able to get what she wanted from men. Another said she had a habit of talking about life insurance policies as if they were investments rather than safety nets. The more detectives uncovered, the clearer it became. Angelina was a woman willing to go to terrifying lengths to secure financial gain. With the mounting evidence against her, law enforcement had no choice but to act fast. In February 2001, authorities moved in. Angelina Rodriguez was arrested and charged with the murder of Frank Rodriguez. But even as she was taken into custody, investigators knew that the fight wasn't over. Angelina wasn't the type to go down easily. If she had spent years carefully orchestrating these deaths, she wasn't about to sit back and let herself be convicted without a fight. And sure enough, when the trial began, the case took even darker and more unexpected turns. The prosecution came prepared, presenting a meticulous timeline of Angelina Rodriguez's actions. They walked the jury through each chilling step. How she had first attempted to poison Frank with crushed oleander leaves, how she had sabotaged their home's gas system in an attempt to create a fatal accident, and finally, how she had resorted to the slow and agonizing method of antifreeze poisoning. But it wasn't just about how she killed him, it was why. The prosecution hammered home the financial motive. They revealed how Angelina had pressured Frank to take out life insurance policies in the months leading up to his death. She had calculated every move, ensuring that his death would look natural while securing her financial future. And, when her plan hit a snag, when authorities hesitated to issue a quick death certificate, she had grown desperate, drawing even more suspicion to herself. Then they brought up Alicia's case. Angelina's defense team fought hard to keep it out, arguing that the death of her infant daughter was irrelevant to Frank's murder. But the prosecution countered, stating that it established a pattern of behavior. Angelina had once before gained financially from an unexplained death, and now she had done it again. The jury listened intently as forensic experts explained the irregularities in Alicia's case. They heard how the pacifier's damage appeared to be deliberate, how the lawsuit money had been spent lavishly, and how the circumstances eerily mirrored Frank's death. Both victims had trusted Angelina completely, and both had died in ways that initially appeared accidental. Then came the witness testimonies. One of the most damning came from a fellow inmate who had shared a cell with Angelina while she awaited trial. The woman claimed that Angelina had openly discussed her crimes, even bragging about how she had almost gotten away with it. The inmate also alleged that Angelina had tried to solicit help in tampering with evidence or intimidating witnesses. Angelina's defense attorneys scrambled to discredit the testimony, pointing out the woman's own criminal background, but when combined with the other overwhelming evidence, it painted a devastating picture of a woman devoid of remorse. The jury deliberated for only a few hours. On October 22, 2003, they returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances, including murder for financial gain and murder by poison. Angelina was also convicted of attempting to dissuade a witness from testifying against her. When the verdict was read, Angelina showed no emotion, no tears, no visible distress, just the same cold calculation she had displayed throughout the trial. 3 months later, in January 2004, the judge handed down the ultimate punishment: death. In his sentencing statement, the judge described Angelina as manipulative, heartless, and beyond redemption. He called her crimes a masterclass in deception and greed, saying that she had used love as a weapon to destroy those who trusted her. Angelina Rodriguez was sent to death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, becoming one of the few women in California sentenced to death. But even behind bars, she refused to go quietly. For years, she filed appeal after appeal, claiming that she had been wrongfully convicted, that the trial had been unfair, and that her legal counsel had failed her. She argued that the prosecution had used emotional manipulation rather than solid evidence to convict her. Then, in 2024, after more than 2 decades on death row, a judge granted her a resentencing hearing. The reason? Alleged ineffective legal representation during her original sentencing phase. This time, prosecutors made a surprising decision. They chose not to pursue the death penalty again. Instead, Angelina Rodriguez was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a victory for her in some ways. She had avoided execution, but it was also a final confirmation that she would never walk free again. She would live out the rest of her days in a cell, stripped of the freedom she had so callously taken from others. A fitting end for a woman who had built her life on deception and death. And now, I want to hear from you. If you believe that justice was served in this case, subscribe to the channel. Only those who think killers should roam free will ignore this. And if you want more true crime stories just like this one, check out the next video on your screen.